The sun blazed over the dry grasslands of Africa. A group of small, hairy creatures moved cautiously through the tall grass. Not yet humans, but not quite apes. Their survival depended on one thing: food. But this wasn't just about hunger. This was about evolution. What they ate would change everything. The world was harsh 4.8 million years ago. Forests were shrinking, and open savannas stretched for miles. Ardipithecus, our distant ancestors, walked awkwardly on two legs, but still climbed trees like monkeys. They weren't strong like lions or fast like antelopes. They were smart. One morning, a young male we'll call Keto woke up hungry. His group hadn't found enough fruit yesterday. The trees here were sparse, and competition was fierce. Monkeys chattered above, throwing half-eaten figs to the ground. Keto watched them carefully. If the monkeys ate it, maybe it was safe. He grabbed a fallen fig and took a bite, sweet, but not enough. His stomach growled. Then he noticed something. A patch of dug-up earth near a termite mound. Baboons were scratching at it, pulling out wriggling insects. Keto hesitated, eating bugs. But hunger won. He dug his fingers in, pulling out a handful of termites. The first bite was bitter, but the protein surged through him. This could work. Nearby, an older female already cracked open a turtle shell with a rock, something she'd seen a bird do. The group was learning. Tools, insects, scavenged meat. They weren't just surviving. They were adapting. The wind howled across the open plains, carrying the scent of rain, but no clouds darkened the sky. The drought had lasted for weeks. A young Deinotherium, a massive elephant-like beast with downward curving tusks, lumbered toward a dried-up riverbed. His stomach ached with emptiness. The usual shrubs were gone, stripped bare by desperate herds before him. He swung his trunk weakly, sniffing the air. Something was different. Nearby, a pack of Ancilotherium, strange, clawed creatures halfway between horses and gorillas, dug at the hard earth with their powerful limbs. They weren't just searching for roots. One of them let out a sharp grunt as it uncovered a hidden cache of tubers, swollen with stored water. The Deinotherium watched, instincts warring inside him. He was built for towering trees, not digging. But hunger made creatures do strange things. With a slow, deliberate motion, he pressed his foot into the dirt, testing. The soil cracked. He leaned his weight forward, tusks scraping the ground like crude plows. Dust flew as he worked, his trunk coiling around a thick, knotted root. He yanked, it resisted, then snapped. The taste was bitter, but moisture trickled down his throat. It worked. But survival never came easy. A shadow flickered at the edge of the clearing. A Dinofelis, a saber-toothed predator built like a monstrous jaguar, crouched low in the grass. It wasn't after the Deinotherium, not yet. Its golden eyes locked onto the Ancilotherium calf, strayed too far from the group. The Deinotherium froze. He could charge, scatter them, maybe save the calf, but why risk himself? The Ancilotherium mother screamed, rushing forward, but the Dinofelis was faster. Claws flashed. The hunt was over in seconds. As the predator dragged its prize away, the Deinotherium returned to his digging. The world was cruel, but it was also changing. New foods, new dangers. The ones who adapted would live another day. The dry season stretched on, turning the once lush plains into a cracked wasteland. The Deinotherium moved slowly now, his ribs visible beneath his thick, wrinkled skin. The tubers had sustained him, but they were getting harder to find. Each step sent pain shooting through his massive legs, the price of surviving in a world that seemed determined to break him. Near a dwindling waterhole, a drama was unfolding. A herd of Calicotherium, bizarre creatures with the body of a gorilla and the head of a horse, clustered nervously at the water's edge. Their long, clawed forelimbs made them look like nightmare versions of sloths, but these were no gentle giants. The largest male snapped his yellowed teeth as a group of megalohyrax, oversized hyrax relatives the size of modern tapirs, tried to push forward for their turn to drink. The Deinotherium watched from a distance, his trunk twitching as he caught the scent of something strange in the air. It was faint, but unmistakable, the metallic tang of blood. Following his nose, he came upon a shocking sight. A young Calicotherium lay dying, its belly torn open by what could only be the work of the Dinofelis from days before. But something was different. The carcass was moving. As he watched in horrified fascination, the skin bulged and split open. Dozens of enormous beetles, each the size of a modern apple, crawled out from inside the corpse, their shiny black carapaces glistening with gore. The Deinotherium had seen carrion insects before, but never like this. These were something new, something hungry. The beetles clicked their mandibles in unison, a sound like dry twigs snapping. Then, as one, they turned toward the living Calicotherium herd. At first the giant mammals didn't notice, too busy bickering over the water. Then one female screamed as the beetles swarmed up her legs, their sharp mouthparts slicing through thick hide like it was nothing. Chaos erupted. The Calicotherium panicked, crashing into each other as they tried to flee. The Deinotherium backed away, his heart pounding. This wasn't normal behavior. These beetles were hunting live prey. As he turned to leave, he noticed something even more disturbing. The beetles weren't just eating the Calicotherium. They were herding them, driving them away from the waterhole toward some unknown destination. A shadow passed overhead, a flock of Argentavis, the largest flying birds to ever exist, circling like vultures. But they didn't descend. Even they seemed afraid of what was happening below. The Deinotherium realized with dawning horror that the rules were changing. The droughts were bad enough, but now the very insects were turning against the mammals. If creatures this small could bring down giants, what hope did any of them have? Yet even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, his stomach growled. The carcass was still there, mostly untouched by the beetles. Against all instinct, he stepped forward. The beetles had moved on, chasing the living. This meat, however foul, could keep him alive another day. As he began to feed, he noticed movement in the distance. The Ancyllotherium herd he'd seen before was returning, but they were different now, marching in tight formation, their eyes wild with fear. Behind them, the ground itself seemed to be moving. The beetle swarm had grown larger, much larger. The ground trembled as the Ancyllotherium stampeded past, their panicked breaths coming in ragged gasps. The Deinotherium barely had time to react before he saw it, a living carpet of black, chitinous bodies rolling across the savanna like a dark tide. The beetle swarm had multiplied, now numbering in the hundreds of thousands. They moved with terrifying coordination, their clicking mandibles creating an eerie rhythm that seemed almost intelligent. A young Ancyllotherium stumbled, its leg caught in a crevice. Before it could rise, the beetles were upon it. The Deinotherium watched in horror as the creatures worked together, some latching onto the struggling animal's eyes and nostrils, while others sawed at its tough hide with razor-sharp jaws. Within minutes, the calf's screams faded into wet, crunching silence. The Deinotherium knew he had to move. But where? The waterhole was now a death trap, the beetles clearly herding prey away from it for some sinister purpose. The shrinking forests offered little shelter, their thinning canopies no longer provided real protection. For the first time in his long life, he felt true fear. Not the quick panic of a predator's chase, but the slow, gnawing dread of an enemy that couldn't be outrun or outmuscled. Then came the smell, a strange, acrid odor carried on the wind from the east. The beetles reacted immediately, their swarm rippling as if disturbed. The Deinotherium caught glimpses of movement beyond the dust. A group of Hyaenodon, the apex predators of their time, were doing something extraordinary. They had rolled in a strange, sticky mud that seemed to repel the insects. Even more surprising, they weren't attacking the other herbivores. Instead, they moved with purpose toward a rocky outcrop, occasionally pausing to let smaller animals follow. Curiosity overcoming caution, the Deinotherium followed at a distance. The rocks hid a secret, a narrow passage leading to a hidden valley where steam rose from bubbling pools. The smell was overwhelming here, but the beetles wouldn't cross some invisible line. The Hyaenodon were wallowing in the sulfurous mud, coating themselves in nature's armor. One of the massive predators locked eyes with the Deinotherium. For a heartbeat, they understood each other. This wasn't about hunting or territory anymore. This was about survival of all. But just as hope flickered to life, the ground shook violently. From the steaming pools, something enormous began to emerge. The steaming pools erupted in a geyser of boiling water, sending panicked animals scrambling back. Through the curtain of mist emerged a nightmarish sight. A massive, crocodile-like creature, its armored hide dripping with mineral-rich water. This was no ordinary reptile. It was a Madsoya, a prehistoric serpent over 30 feet long that had been hibernating in the geothermal depths. The heat had awakened it. The Deinotherium staggered backward as the giant snake's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. The hyaenodon pack formed a defensive circle, their mud-coated fur bristling. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the Madsoya struck, not at the mammals, but at the edge of the beetle swarm that had dared to approach its domain. Its massive jaws snapped shut on hundreds of the chitinous creatures, crunching them like brittle twigs. The beetles recoiled, their eerie clicking taking on a frantic, disorganized tone. The Deinotherium watched in awe as nature's balance shifted before his eyes. The serpent, immune to the beetle's attacks due to its thick scales, became an unlikely protector of the mud-coated mammals. But safety came at a price. The Madsoya began methodically herding the animals toward the hottest springs, where the sulfur smell was strongest. A sickening realization dawned. The snake wasn't protecting them. It was farming them. The geothermal area was its territory, and by keeping prey near the poisonous waters, it could pick them off at leisure when hunger struck. The Deinotherium found himself trapped between three horrors: the ravenous beetles, the cunning serpent, and the deadly pools themselves. His stomach growled painfully. He hadn't eaten properly in days. Nearby, he noticed a patch of strange, tough grass growing at the edge of a bubbling spring. Most animals avoided it, but desperation drove him to take a mouthful. The taste was bitter, almost metallic, but within moments, a curious thing happened. His aching muscles relaxed. The ever-present hunger pangs dulled. The plant had some medicinal property, perhaps even something that could counteract the beetle's venom. As he chewed thoughtfully, the ground trembled again. This time, it wasn't the snake or the springs. From the cracked earth beyond the valley, dozens of thick, segmented legs emerged. A colony of Arthroplura, giant millipedes the size of tree trunks, drawn by the chemical scent of the beetles. The ancient ecosystem was unraveling, and the Deinotherium stood at the center of it all. The Arthroplura moved with eerie synchronization, their countless legs rippling like waves across the cracked earth. Each segmented creature was longer than the Deinotherium's tusks, their armored backs glistening with a strange, oily secretion. The beetles scattered before them, not in fear, but in what almost looked like reverence. The Deinotherium backed toward the hot springs, his trunk twitching at the millipede's pungent odor. The hyaenodon pack had gone completely still, their mud-caked fur bristling. Even the mighty Madsoya seemed uncertain, its massive coils tightening defensively around a steaming boulder. Then the first Arthroplura reached the beetle swarm. Instead of attacking, it lowered its head, and the beetles climbed aboard. Within minutes, the giant millipede became a living transport, its back crawling with the chitinous killers. More millipedes arrived, each accepting their beetle passengers. A terrible understanding dawned on the Deinotherium. This wasn't random. The millipedes' oily secretion protected them from the beetles' jaws, and in return, the beetles acted as their scouts and attackers. Together, they formed the ultimate hunting partnership. The first coordinated strike came without warning. A millipede charged the hyaenodon pack, its beetle riders leaping off mid-stride. One predator went down screaming as dozens of beetles burrowed into its nostrils. The Madsoya struck back, crushing a millipede in its jaws, only to recoil as the creature's acidic blood burned its mouth. Amid the chaos, the Deinotherium noticed something peculiar. The medicinal grass he'd eaten earlier seemed to make the beetles avoid him. They'd skitter close, then turn away as if repelled by his breath. A desperate plan formed in his ancient mind. He trumpeted loudly, gathering the attention of every surviving herbivore: Calicotherium, Ancilotherium, even a pair of terrified Pyrotherium that had wandered into the valley. Then he began ripping up great mouthfuls of the bitter grass, deliberately spreading its juice across his body. The others caught on quickly, mimicking his actions. The beetles hesitated. The millipedes circled uncertainly. For the first time since the drought began, the prey had found a way to fight back. But as the Deinotherium led the retreat from the valley, he noticed the millipedes weren't following. Instead, they were gathering around the hottest springs, and their bodies were starting to glow faintly orange. The geothermal heat wasn't just waking creatures from hibernation. It was changing them. The night fell like a heavy curtain over the savanna, but the darkness brought no relief. The Deinotherium and his ragged band of survivors huddled near a rocky outcrop, their bodies still smeared with the bitter juice of the medicinal grass. In the distance, an eerie orange glow pulsed from the geothermal valley. The millipedes had become living lanterns, their bioluminescent bodies casting long shadows across the cracked earth. At first, the glow remained contained within the valley. Then, as the moon reached its zenith, the first glowing arthropleura emerged. Its armored segments pulsed with heat, steam rising from its body as it moved. The beetles riding its back had changed too. Their carapaces had taken on a metallic sheen, their mandibles glowing red-hot at the tips. The Deinotherium watched in horror as the creature approached a withered acacia tree. With one touch of its antennae, the wood burst into flames. This wasn't just a predator anymore. It was a walking wildfire. Panic spread through the herd. The Calicotherium began digging frantically at the hard earth, trying to create fire breaks. The Ancilotherium formed a protective circle around their young, their clawed feet scraping trenches in the dirt. Even the normally solitary Pyrotherium huddled close, their trunk-like noses twitching at the smoke now curling through the air. Then came the sound, a deep, resonant vibration that made the ground tremble. From the direction of the dying forest, a new group of survivors arrived. A herd of Paraceratherium, the largest land mammals to ever walk the earth, moved with surprising speed despite their massive size. Their leader, a scarred male missing one ear, trumpeted a challenge at the glowing millipede. What happened next defied all natural law. The Paraceratherium charged, its 30-ton bulk shaking the earth. Just before collision, it veered sharply and stomped, creating a shockwave that sent the millipede tumbling. The giant mammal's feet were wrapped in thick layers of mud and bark, a primitive insulation against the heat. The Deinotherium recognized the strategy immediately. These titans had been fighting the glowing menace longer than anyone. They'd learned to adapt. As the night wore on, an unspoken alliance formed between the different species. The Paraceratherium provided brute force, their massive bodies creating fire breaks. The Deinotherium and his group used their grasping trunks to spread wet mud as a fire retardant. Even the Hyaenodon pack helped, their keen noses sniffing out underground water sources. But just as they began to gain ground, the earth itself rebelled. A deep, guttural roar echoed from beneath their feet, the sound of continents arguing. The drought, the fires, and the constant trampling had weakened the land beyond its limits. Fissures opened like hungry mouths. Geysers of superheated steam erupted without warning. And from the deepest cracks emerged shapes no living creature had seen before. Pale, eyeless things with too many legs, awakened after eons of slumber. The ground split apart with a sound like thunder, revealing a nightmare from the planet's deepest memory. Pale, segmented creatures, neither insect nor worm, but something far older, poured from the fissures. Their bodies pulsed with a sickly bioluminescence, their countless legs moving in hypnotic waves. The Deinotherium felt his ancient instincts scream. These were things that should never walk the surface. The first subterranean horror lunged at a young Paraceratherium, its needle-like mouthparts piercing through the thick hide with terrifying ease. The giant mammal collapsed without a sound, its body convulsing as some unknown toxin took effect. Within moments, the pale creatures were upon it, reducing the massive frame to bones in minutes. Chaos erupted. The Hyaenodon pack broke formation, some fleeing while others attacked in frenzied desperation. One brave predator clamped its jaws on a pale creature, only to stagger back, frothing at the mouth as the thing's blood burned like acid. The glowing millipedes hesitated, their antennae twitching uncertainly at these new arrivals. Even nature's mutated horrors recognized something wrong about these underground invaders. The Deinotherium trumpeted a warning as he noticed the fissures spreading toward the last remaining water source, a muddy depression where the Ancilotherium had been digging. His mind raced. The medicinal grass, the millipedes' heat, the underground monsters, it all connected. The earth was purging itself. With sudden clarity, he charged toward the largest fissure, his tusks plowing through the crumbling soil. The other survivors watched in confusion as he began what looked like madness. Until they saw the water. The Deinotherium wasn't just digging. He was redirecting the last underground springs toward the fissures. One by one, the creatures understood. The Chalicotherium used their powerful claws to widen the channels. The Pyrotherium used their shovel-like noses to push mud into barriers. Even the Paraceratherium joined, their massive feet stamping the earth to guide the flow. As water hit the first fissure, steam exploded upward. The pale creatures shrieked, an unearthly sound that made every living thing flinch. Where the water touched them, their bioluminescence flickered and died. The millipedes recoiled, their glow dimming as if in sympathy. But the victory was fragile. The water sources were nearly exhausted, and the fissures kept spreading. In the distance, the Deinotherium spotted movement, a new herd approaching. Not survivors, not even mutants. These were Megatherium, giant ground sloths that normally avoided open plains, driven from their forest homes by the spreading devastation. Their arrival changed everything. For these slow-moving giants carried something unexpected: seeds. Thousands of them, caught in their thick fur. Seeds from plants that hadn't grown on these plains in millennia. As the sloths moved, they unknowingly planted the future. The Deinotherium looked from the dying fissures to the arriving sloths, then to the exhausted survivors around him. The rules of survival were being rewritten before his eyes. The drought had broken them, the mutations had tested them, and the earth itself had tried to swallow them, but life found a way. As dawn painted the sky, the first raindrops fell. The first raindrops sizzled as they struck the still-glowing millipedes, sending up wisps of acrid smoke. The Deinotherium lifted his trunk to the sky, tasting the unfamiliar moisture. It carried the metallic tang of distant storms, not the sweet freshness he remembered from his youth. This was no ordinary rain. As the shower intensified, the surviving creatures witnessed something impossible. The water pooling in the cracked earth began to move against the wind, forming silvery rivulets that snaked toward the largest fissures. The pale subterranean creatures shrieked and retreated underground, their bioluminescence flickering like dying embers. But the real miracle happened near the Megatherium herd. Where their seed-laden fur brushed the damp earth, tiny green shoots erupted with unnatural speed. Not the familiar savanna grasses, but strange, fleshy plants with bulbous leaves that pulsed as they grew. One curious Ancyllotherium calf nibbled a leaf, and immediately spat it out, its mouth foaming slightly. These weren't food plants. They were defensive ones. The Deinotherium watched in awe as the rapidly growing vegetation formed a living barrier around the water holes. The glowing millipedes that touched the plants recoiled, their heat diminished. Even the remaining beetles avoided them. Nature wasn't just recovering, it was adapting at visible speed. Then came the sound. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the ground, making every animal freeze. From the direction of the retreating subterranean horrors rose an enormous shape, a creature that defied classification. Part fungus, part animal, its pulsating mass glowed with the same sickly light as the underground beings, but its surface constantly shifted between plant and animal characteristics. This was no mere organism, it was the source. The Hyaenodon pack leader, despite his injuries, was the first to react. With a courage that belied his species' nature, he charged the abomination and was swallowed whole without resistance. The creature pulsed larger, but the Deinotherium noticed something. Where the rain touched the monstrosity, its form wavered. The strange new plants seemed to repel it. A plan formed in his ancient mind. He trumpeted to the Paraceratherium herd, then deliberately uprooted one of the pulsing plants with his tusks. The giant mammals understood immediately. What followed was nature's first coordinated war. The Paraceratherium used their strength to uproot the defensive plants. The Chalicotherium and Ancyllotherium carried them in their claws. The Megatherium, surprisingly agile for their size, placed them in strategic formations. Together, they created a living barrier between the monstrosity and the recovering land. As the rain intensified, the creature's glow began to fade. It lashed out with pseudopods, but each contact with the strange plants weakened it further. With a final, earth-shaking tremor, it retreated into the deepest fissure, but not before releasing one last burst of spores into the wind. The Deinotherium watched the glowing particles disperse across the savanna. This wasn't over. The rules of life had changed forever. As the first normal green shoots finally pushed through the wet soil, he realized with grim certainty, The age of miracles and monsters had just begun. The spores floated through the air like glowing dust, settling across the ravaged land. The Deinotherium watched as the last of the pale creatures vanished into the fissures, their eerie light fading into the depths. The rain continued to fall, washing away the ash and blood, revealing something remarkable: patches of fresh, green grass sprouting where the strange defensive plants had been. The surviving animals gathered around the newly formed oasis, their bodies battered but spirits unbroken. The Megatherium munched quietly on the tender shoots, their gentle eyes reflecting the morning sun. The Paraceratherium stood guard, their massive frames casting long shadows over the smaller creatures. Even the Hyaenodon pack, now reduced to just a few members, kept their distance but no longer bared their teeth. The Deinotherium took a step forward, his trunk brushing the leaves of a young sapling. It was a familiar plant, one he hadn't seen since his youth, before the droughts and the horrors. The world was healing, but it would never be the same. The spores had changed things. Some animals had developed strange markings where the glowing particles had touched them. Others seemed sharper, more aware. As the herd settled into an uneasy peace, a new sound filled the air, a chorus of chirps and clicks. From the branches of a surviving acacia tree, a flock of small, feathered creatures peered down. They were new. Not dinosaurs, not birds, something in between. Their eyes gleamed with intelligence as they watched the mammals below. The Deinotherium locked eyes with one of them, and in that moment, he understood. The struggle had never been about survival of the strongest. It had been about survival of the adaptable. The ones who could change, who could learn, who could work together, even with former enemies, were the ones who would inherit the earth. The spores had brought danger, but they had also brought possibility. With a final, deep rumble, the Deinotherium turned away from the fissures and toward the rising sun. The world was different now, but it was still theirs. Moral lesson: strength alone does not guarantee survival. It is adaptability, cooperation, and the willingness to learn from the land that carries life forward, even in the face of the unknown.